Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, happy time zone wherever you may be. And today we're going to be talking about the Fey Wanderer Ranger. We had a comment asking if I can go over a monk or a ranger subclass, and I'm a bit more familiar with ranger, so I decided that we'll be going with what I think is a very interesting subclass for ranger. Now, ranger is a very unique class, I think, and one that has certainly been a topic for discussion really for as long as it's existed in 5th edition. If I'm not mistaken, ranger is really the only class that got a really big revision back in 2014, and even going from 2014 to 2024, this class has changed quite a lot. In 2014, it was very exploration focused, but I do think that with how Wizards of the Coast writes their modules, and I think with the increased tendency to go towards more narrative games with, things like Critical Role, things like Dimension 20, bringing in all these new players who want a very narrative campaign. 2014 Ranger, and the aspect of the Ranger being this titan of exploration that is able to guide through all of these different terrains and whatnot, is kind of been tossed in the bin. I think that maybe the only example is something like Rime of the Frost Maiden. Building a 2014 Ranger around Tundra, could be very useful in that situation. But with 2024 coming out, I think WotC has realized that they need to get away from that, because a lot of the reasons that those abilities worked simply don't really exist anymore. So they've redesigned Ranger, and I think that it's such a strange redesign. I'll eventually make the full class videos instead of these subclass videos. But there's at least a few things I want to touch on because they're sort of pertinent for later. And that's, well, one of them is what Ranger is now. And Ranger, it previously existed as this worse rogue, worse fighter, strange caster with a weird spell list. That, on paper was pretty bad. And frankly, many people who played Ranger said that it simply felt bad to play. And so what they've turned it into is it's actually very similar. In that, when it comes to the nature of it, it is similar to Fighter. It has a D10, it gets weapon masteries, it gets fighting styles, it gets an extra attack. And in the nature of it being a rogue, it gets things like expertise. It gets riders on its attack with Hunter's Mark. But I think that my biggest issue is actually specifically this Hunter's Mark. Because they've turned it into something very core to the Ranger. You can see here you can cast it without expending spell slots and you get them back. And even up here you get yeah, it's called, favorite enemy. It's changed, right? You can see how many free castings you get of it. And I think it's strange that they put so much effort into this. And you can kind of see later on in the levels, like at level 13, you can't break your concentration on Hunter's Mark. At level 17, you have advantage against creatures with Hunter's Mark. And at level 20, the die increased from a D6 to a D10. And I think that them building so heavily around this first level concentration spell, and that's mainly the reason, is it's this concentration spell that I don't know. I personally am not a huge fan of it. I'm not a fan of the design of Ranger in 2024. I think it's objectively better, but I think that it puts too many eggs into the Hunter's Mark basket. I'll talk more about it during the class video for Ranger, but I just think Ranger's in a really weird spot with forcing it to really focus so much on Hunter's Mark. But all of that said, we're here for Fey Wanderer. We're here to talk about this very interesting subclass. And I think that I chose Fey Wanderer because, well, it is very interesting. I think that the other subclasses, you have Beastmaster. You know, you have your Drizzt Do'Urden with his dual scimitars and, you know, Guinevere, which I think that's the name. I could be completely butchering it. Or the Ranger who has, like, their eagle, their trusty eagle, the Ranger with the wolf, you know, things like that. Beastmaster is a very typical Ranger subclass, one that you would always expect to see. And it's actually not really interesting to me. I'm not a huge fan of Beastmaster, frankly. We also have Hunter, which is just Ranger Plus, and Gloomstalker, which I think historically is kind of the best Ranger subclass, or at least the best to kind of multi-class into. But Fey Wanderer is so unique. This is actually the third time I'm recording this video because of mic issues. And I think Fey Wanderer is such an awesome subclass. I think that people get kind of turned off from it, seeing the advantages you get at level 3. But it's actually a really awesome subclass to kind of stay spec'd into until you get all of its abilities. So yeah, without really any further ado, let's just get right into it. The Fey Wanderer wields Fey Mirth and Fury. You get a Fey mystique that surrounds you and grants you this subclass. And I think flavor-wise, that's really fun. You can do so much with it. Because Rangers are so open-ended now, you can really choose just about any sort of background you'd like. You know, you're not tied to the forest, you're not tied to, you know, the desert or nature or anything exactly, but you know, perhaps you did meet an Archfey or a representative of that Archfey. Perhaps you found an artifact that was suffused with Fey magic, or, you know, maybe you just met someone who bestowed this magic upon you. I think the flavor of this is really fun and something you can discuss with your DM, you know, even if it's, I think for me, I love the idea of finding, like, you know, an item, and it's just a regular item, but it's suffused with this Fey magic, and maybe it grows with you. I think that's really cool. But getting started with it, we have level 3 Dreadful Strikes. You can augment your weapon strikes with mind-scarring magic drawn from the murky hollows of the Feywild. When you hit a creature with a weapon, you can deal an extra 1d4 psychic damage to the target, which take this extra damage only once per turn. The extra damage increases to 1d6 when you reach Ranger level 11. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that this is the first thing you read, because in my opinion, this is a pretty weak ability. It is free damage every turn that you hit. You know, that's not up for debate, but, you know, you look at something like a Gloomstalker. You know, they deal quite a bit of extra damage on you know, turn 1, which I know I really lambasted that back when I did the Assassin video, but, you know, Gloomstalker does quite a bit of extra damage. Colossus Slayer deals an extra 1d8 damage. You know, Beastmaster, you can take your you know, your bonus action to command to bite, which deals a d8 plus 2 plus your wisdom, which is a lot of damage. And this one, it's just 1d4. Now, psychic damage is rarely resisted, and very rarely is something immune to it. So you'll never you'll very rarely run into the issue of something being resistant to this damage. So it'll always be going through. But I do think the scaling is pretty bad. And I think that they could honestly up it to a d6 at, you know, level 3. Maybe change it so it's a d6 at level 7 and a d8 at level 11. I just feel like it's not a ton of extra damage. You can only apply it once per turn, so it's not like something that is abusable with multi-attack. I simply just feel like, this is kind of a bad first impression. A D4 is not a ton, and of course, you are adding that on top of something like a hunter's mark, most likely. But I just feel like it's not something that's super impactful, and let's say a combat lasts 5 rounds, and every one of those rounds you're attacking and hitting. At that point you're adding 5 to 20 extra damage, which it adds up, but I just don't think it's super impactful, in my opinion. I'm not the biggest fan of Dreadful Strikes, and it's not because it's bad. It's not because it's something that really takes away, but it's sort of mediocre, in my opinion. But I also believe that it's probably the least interesting part of the subclass. Next, we do get some spells. There are only 2 ranger subclasses that get spells, the Fey Wanderer and the Gloomstalker. Beastmaster and Hunter do not get spells. And spells are kind of interesting for ranger, because more often than not, you as a ranger will want to pump your dexterity to 20, your main attacking stat. You probably won't be doing strength, because ranger doesn't really work well with strength. But one thing that's very interesting, and you'll see this later, is in a way Fey Wanderer kind of incentivizes you to bump up your wisdom. More so than other subclasses, and it's actually quite doable, especially if you want to play a melee ranger. You can see that at level 2 you get a fighting style, and you can choose Druidic Warrior, allowing you to get Druid cantrips. And of course, Shillelagh is an option for that. Things like Primal Savagery and whatnot. And I think Fey Wanderer does pretty well with Wisdom. That said, let's get into the spells, and at level 3 we get Charm Person. Charm Person is a pretty cute spell. I think it's fun. I personally don't use it a ton myself. It lasts an hour, it has verbal somatic components, and the target knows that it gets charmed by you. But it can be useful for information gathering, especially if you're passing through pretty quickly. Maybe you were talking to a bandit or something, and you just need to get directions from them. Having Charm Person is nice. If you do decide to pump dex, the DC for this will be pretty low for, not pretty low, but relatively low for a good while. But I always kind of see this one, at least flavor-wise, as being able to charm just kind of, the typical person. You're not going to be using this against Baloths. You're not going to be using this against, very high-level monsters. I think it's really nice just to use it against, guards or bandits or something like that. The kind of Fey control and dominance that exists there. Where, even with, a DC 13 or 14, they have a 65% chance or so to fail. So I think Charm Person's pretty fun. I don't dislike Charm Person. And while the Ranger does have a lot of pretty good first level spells, this is something that is always prepared. You'll always have this in your back pocket. At level 5, you get Misty Step. I think I've mentioned quite a few times on this channel that I think Misty Step is just such a good spell, and especially for a martial. Being able to reposition basically anywhere, and if you're ranged, using this to get out of dodge if someone cuts close to you. If you're melee, using it to close the distance. Using it in exploration, to cross a ravine and maybe pull a lever or something. The uses of Misty Step are boundless. I think Misty Step it's genuinely, I think, one of my favorite spells. I think that it will always be useful, and it's such a welcome addition to the spell list. I don't know. I'm gonna make a whole video on Misty Step. I love Misty Step. At level 9, you get a very interesting spell with Summon Fey. And Summon Fey, I prior to this, I didn't really look at the summon spells a lot. The ones that exist here in Tasha's, but I think that Summon Fey is quite good. It takes 1 action. It's concentration. It lasts for an hour. But you do get to add an extra body to the field. Pardon me. Pardon me. It doesn't take any extra actions to command it. You're not going to have to use bonus actions on your turn to command it. It acts on its own in initiative. It comes in with 30 health, 15 AC. It's pretty... It's not bad. Now, granted, at level 9, 30 health isn't a ton. And this thing's not going to be taking a lot of hits. But you can see it gets an attack. And it deals 2d6 plus 3 plus 3 generally. Unless you upcast it, force damage, which... I mean, that's nothing to really scoff at. And as a bonus action, it gets Face Step. It gets 3 different options with Fuming, Mirthful, and Tricksy. Fuming is if you want to be able to hit and can kind of ensure that, you know, this thing will not be getting hit. Mirthful, I think, is really fun because it charms creatures that are within that are within 10 feet of itself whenever it Misty Steps. And I think that's really useful because, you know, with how squishy this thing is, they can't attack the charmer, and this thing will be able to continue to hit. It does use your spell save DC, which is kind of another reason that I think speccing towards wisdom is not a bad idea for the Fey Wanderer. And then, of course, you have Tricksy here at the end, which just fills a 10-foot cube within 5 feet of it with magical darkness. That's really good for kind of forcing your enemies to move around, blinding them in case, you know, you want to have your, you know, if you have a warlock who can see within that darkness, it's very useful with that. But otherwise, it's a pretty good area effect. I really think that Summon Fey is a fun spell. I think it's a really fun spell that you can cast before you go into a dungeon and have it for an hour, and you won't get Hunter's Mark. You'll be using your concentration on this, but it's a pretty strong spell. You know, it works well if you have a rogue. It works well, you know, with like a paladin. It's just another thing in the front line. Something to distract enemies from, you know, attacking you if you're using a bow or, you know, your backline. I think Summon Fey is a fun spell. I actually really do like these Tasha's summon spells quite a bit more than the summon spells that exist in the past. Spoiler alert, I'll be talking a bit more about this spell later. It's pretty darn cool. Pardon. At level 13, you get Dimension Door. Similar to Misty Step. Well, Misty Step you'll probably be using a lot in combat. Dimension Door you'll be using a lot out of combat. It's 500 feet, which is such a huge distance. You can bring an ally with you. Dimension Door just... It's always useful, I think. You know, if you're in some sort of time trial to get out of somewhere, Dimension Door, and it's basically free. You know, do you need to get up somewhere to put a rope? Dimension Door, and it's free. I think Dimension Door... I love teleportation spells. And I do really like the flavor. I didn't mention this with Misty Step, but I think teleportation has really been tied to Fey. And I don't know, I like the flavor of, you know, stepping into this Fey realm and bringing someone and you know, stepping out somewhere else. No, Dimension Door is such an awesome spell to always have prepared. It's so good for, like, you know, you never know when you're going to be in a situation when Dimension Door is going to be needed. And to have it is extremely useful, in my opinion. And then at level 17, your 5th level spell, you get Mislead, which is a pretty cute spell. It's very useful, I think, for scouting ahead and not necessarily rousing suspicion the same way with a familiar. Basically, you just turn invisible for an hour, and you create a invisible double of yourself. You can move it quite far. It can gesture. It can speak. It behaves like you. You can see through its eyes and ears. or sorry, you can see through its eyes and hear through its ears. And it's really, I don't know, I think it's a cute spell. This is a spell that I would probably never take. And very rarely would I spend a slot to prepare it. But it also gives me the vibes of a spell that you think, I really wish I had this prepared. So to have it always prepared and to always have it on the spell slot, and just most importantly have it as an option, I think is really fun and cool. I can't speak much to it because I haven't used it a lot. If you guys have used Mislead, please let me know. But I do like it. I think it's very fitting, I think, for a Fey. I do quite like it a lot. And I think all of these spells are very fitting for a Fey Wanderer. I think they're all really fun. You also get little Feywild gifts. These are things you can talk to your DM about, but they're all cute. You can have butterflies around you when you take a rest. You can have flowers in your hair. You can smell good. You can have horns or antlers. Just a lot of fun flavor things. And I do think that there is a lot of fun to be had with the flavor. I don't think that these should be completely skipped over. They're very important to building your character, I think. I do like these quite a bit. With that though, let's go ahead and get into Otherworldly Glamour. So whenever you make a charisma check, you gain a bonus to the check equal to your wisdom modifier. You gain proficiency in one of these skills of your choice: deception, performance, or persuasion. Now this one's interesting because once again, it kind of incentivizes you to pump your wisdom. And even if you don't, it'll give you a permanent +3 to all your charisma checks, which is pretty darn good. Well, depending on how you build your character, but pardon me, I'm so sorry. I think this is really interesting because in a way it does turn the ranger into someone who is capable of being a face, which is never a role you would really consider the ranger for. I don't think you'll ever be the primary face unless you are in a group that doesn't have any charisma, which is pretty unlikely considering that, 33% of the subclasses are charisma based between paladin and sorcerer and warlock and bard. But I think always having this backup, extra help with social checks is really important. I actually play a fighter with -1 charisma, and I do find that it kind of hinders me a lot of the times because even if you're not a face, you're going to have to make charisma checks eventually. You will have to speak and you will have to be put into these situations. So having this bonus is really nice. You also get proficiency with persuasion or deception or performance and not intimidation. Which I think is really cool. I do like it quite a bit. I think having extra help with things like that is really nice. Unfortunately, you do get this a level later than you would get expertise. So it's not until level 9 that unless you take a feat, but it's not until level 9 that you could get expertise in one of these skills. Unless you take a background. I actually right now off the top of my head forget if backgrounds even give skills anymore. Apologies for that. But yeah, I think it's fun. I just think it's a fun little addition to the ranger that you wouldn't normally expect to, oh my lord, sorry. You wouldn't normally expect to see with them. Okay, let's get into their next ability here, Beguiling Twist. And this one is really fun. So, the magic of the Feywild guards your mind. You have advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the charmed or frightened condition. These are pretty scary conditions, so being able to end them I think is very important. Or being able to resist them is important. Something you'll see in AoEs a lot with enemies. In addition, whenever you or a creature you can see within 120 feet of you succeeds on a saving throw to avoid or end the charmed or frightened condition, you can take a reaction to force a different creature you can see within 120 feet of yourself to make a wisdom saving throw against their spell save DC. On a failed save, the target is charmed or frightened for 1 minute. It repeats the save at the end of its turns, ending the effect on a success. Now, I think this is a really cool ability. So, I think when you read it, initially the thought is, okay, well, let's say we're fighting, something that, like an enemy mage, and they cast, like, I believe it's Hypnotic Pattern. That is this charm, or they cast Fear, or something like that. And you succeed it, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to turn this on you, or I'm going to turn this on one of your minions. But one thing that is really interesting that I actually like a bit more is you can use this to synergize with yourself, with your own charm person, or you can use it to synergize with your allies. If you have, say, a bard who casts Fear on enemies and 2 of them succeed, you can effectively force one of them to roll again. You are seeing a creature succeed on a saving throw to avoid the frightened condition. And so you can use your reaction to instill that with Beguiling Twist onto another creature you see. And I think that builds a lot of really fun synergy. I think one of my favorite things in D&D is synergy and working with your allies to really make a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think Beguiling Twist very much is good. It's fantastic at doing that. And it's not just spellcasters. Many marshals, I think I've said this every video, but if you have, say, a battle master with Menacing Strike, you can basically double the effectiveness of it. Where if they do manage to succeed on their save against it, you can move it to something else. It's any charmed or frightened condition and any saving throw to avoid or end it. And so I think that you actually will find a lot more use out of this than you might expect. I think Beguiling Twist is really fun. It costs your reaction, but realistically, I don't think you're using your reaction a ton as a ranger. I don't know. I think it's a really fun and frankly quite flavorful ability that you can really use with yourself. I'm gonna go ahead and actually look at the ranger spell list. I suppose I'm a little silly for thinking that they would have a link to it here. Let's go have a look. So immediately you already do get Charm Person, which this can work with, and maybe it won't work all the time with it, but most guard posts have 2 guards. So what, we can search class, we can go to conditions, frightened and charmed. Okay, well, I was really hoping this would be a bigger list. That's kind of embarrassing. So it's something you'll mostly be using with your friends to synergize with them. But I think that's totally fine. I think it's awesome that you have a chance to synergize with your allies more and more. I'm going to end up kind of just talking around the exact same thing over and over again. But yes, I think it's a really cool ability. All right, next is going to be Fey Reinforcements, and this one is really cool. So you can cast Summon Fey without a material component, and you can cast it once without a spell slot. You can regain the ability to do it with a long rest. Now, just that alone, I think it's normally... I'm not the biggest fan of just, casting spells for free and whatnot, but Summon Fey is a fun spell. Now, what makes this really cool is whenever you start casting the spell, you can modify it so that it doesn't require concentration. If you do so, the spell's duration becomes 1 minute for the casting. And this is, I think, where it becomes really special. Because now you get this 3rd level spell that does not require concentration, that puts a body on the field. And can inflict charmed and stay around for a long time because of that. You can use this in conjunction with your Hunter's Mark. You can use this in conjunction with really any other strong concentration spell that a ranger may have. And I really, really wish that they simply gave this to Hunter's Mark. But sorry, that aside, I think that it'll always, with how, 5th edition and Dungeons and Dragons is made, action economy is so important. And so being able to constantly have this ally with you is and having it be concentration free and being able to do all of your own things while still commanding it, I think is really incredible. Another thing worth noting is that this does not specify when you cast the spell in this way being, of course, the without a spell slot. So every time you cast it, you can do this without concentration. And I don't know, I just cannot really imagine you'd be using your 3rd level spell slots on much else, or even your 4th levels. Basically always having this really juiced up, I don't want to say familiar, but having this summon that is able to do a lot and will do good damage and is able to take hits. I think that having that is just so awesome. I think that rangers have always been sort of scoffed at as spellcasters. Many times rangers feel like their spells are so subpar, and so having this ability to summon a Fey and use a pretty powerful spell, all things considered, have it be not concentration, is so cool. I think it's so cool. I really love it a lot, and I think it adds this extra depth to Ranger that, of course, Beastmaster has something similar to this, but, it just feels really awesome. This as being this summoner that has a creature you can control, that is able to, as I mentioned before, do all of these things I mentioned with Summon Fey, and do it pretty consistently. I think that that's just so awesome. You're never going to drop concentration, so it won't go away. I think it's really cool. I actually love Fey Reinforcements quite a lot. And lastly, we're going to be talking about Misty Wanderer, which is another really awesome subclass feature. So, with this, you can cast Misty Step without expending a spell slot. You can do so a number of times equal to your Wisdom modifier. You regain all uses when you finish a long rest. Free spells again. Misty Step is such an awesome spell that, how could I complain about it? And even if you were to stop it here, it would be an incredibly boring capstone, but still very useful. In addition, though, anytime you cast Misty Step, you can bring along one willing creature you can see within 5 feet of yourself. That creature teleports to an unoccupied space of your choice within 5 feet of your destination space. And this makes Misty Step such an incredible spell. I genuinely think that this makes Fey Wanderer such an awesome battlefield tactician, where each turn you can reposition your allies, you can help them get into so many incredibly useful situations. Perhaps an enemy drops a very scary spell on your wizard. You can walk up if you're next in initiative and take them out of it. You can, if you start a combat far away, you can teleport your paladin closer so they don't have to use an action to dash. There's so many, in my opinion, amazing, useful, I don't know, I just think it's so awesome. I think that even the flavor of it, being able to travel through these Fey realms with your allies and put them in, more opportune places is just so great. Teleportation is, and movement in general, is something that has sort of been power crept into D&D 2024, which feels weird to say. But I just think that being able to move your allies with this is so fun. And I think that you'll find so many great uses of it. You get, at this level, if you're deciding you want to spec into Wisdom, 5 free usages of Misty Step a day. And it's a 2nd level spell, and you can move them even if you use the spell slot. So I think Misty Wanderer is really fun. I think Misty Wanderer and Fey Reinforcements really double down on something that the Ranger historically isn't very strong at, of having these the magic to be able to like do these really interesting things. I just think that it's incredible. I think that it complements Ranger really well. And overall, between like Beguiling Twist and Fey Reinforcements and Misty Wanderer, I think very rarely do I see a subclass with its later features and think I really want to play that. A lot of the times, I think what charms people into, no pun intended, into picking a subclass is the level 3 abilities. And Dreadful Strikes is kind of weak. You know, the spells are something you're going to get later, and even Otherworldly Glamour is kind of weak. Well, it's not that it's weak. It's that it's just kind of something you tack onto it. But Beguiling Twist and Fey Reinforcements and Misty Wanderer are all... It's strange because they feel so appropriately, powerful for the levels you get them. And they're things that you will be using often. And they're things that really distinguish your character from others. Of, hey, I can basically break the rules of magic and summon something without concentration. I can redirect these charming and frightening spells onto other enemies. I can move all of us around the battlefield with ease. I just think it's really incredible. I adore it a lot, and truthfully, seeing this makes me want to play a Fey Wanderer Ranger quite a lot. I think it's such a cool subclass. But with that, I guess we'll go ahead and bring things to a close. Again, I think that it's an incredible subclass, and it's one that I really want to try, and I think my next character will probably end up being a Fey Wanderer. All of that said, though, thank you guys so much for listening. Like I said, this was like my 3rd time recording this, so apologies if my throat sounds bad or anything like that. But I hope you enjoy. I'm sorry that this is a little late, about a week late, but recently my Sunday obligations are done, so I should be able to more consistently post. Another thing I wanted to mention was I've recently been getting very into Vampire the Masquerade. I've been playing the tabletop, and if there was any interest in that, do feel free to leave a comment. I would love to talk about the clans of Vampire. I think they're all so cool. That said, though, thank you guys for hanging out. I hope you guys have an excellent night, and, morning, night, afternoon, whatever it may be. And hopefully I'll see you guys next week. All right, bye, everyone.